Okay, hello everyone. I hope I'm live. I think I am. I'm Tim Green. I'm the features editor of the MEF, and welcome to this next session as part of MEF Connect's digital transformation event. Today we're talking about regulatory frameworks, opportunities or threats. Now, one of the key planks of digital transformation is the ability to digitize your transactions and payments. And the mobile revolution makes all sorts of exciting new solutions possible. Mobile can make payments and transactions easier to do for the general public. They can bring more unbanked people into the financial system. But of course, they also bring challenges and new threats, not least fraud and money laundering, which is why regulators have taken a close interest. They want to stimulate competition and make life easier for customers, but they also want to protect people from harm. So, as we know, regulation can also drastically impact the industry itself. If you do a Google search on what's happening in China, you'll see that the People's Bank of China recently clamped down on a lot of the P2P lending platforms over there and have virtually destroyed an entire industry. So it's an important topic and it's one of great interest to MEF members and all of their customers. So it helps to understand what's going on across the world because it differs greatly from region to region. And it's a good job that the MEF has got experts everywhere, and 5 of them are here with me now, and I'm just about to introduce them. But before I do that, just to remind you, I've got about 45 minutes for this session, and we'd really like you to get involved. So if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the chat box, and I'll get round to those. So I'm going to introduce the panel. I can't see them at the moment, so I'm hoping they're there. They are all appearing now. That's great news. Okay, so yeah, it's a truly global bunch, and I'm going to ask them to very briefly introduce themselves. Don't go on and give your entire CV, but if you could just tell us who you are, where you're from, and which region you're covering. So we'll start with Bipin, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bipin Patel. I work at Sinch, one of their product management team over there. As a part of Sinch, we basically provide a communication as a platform service to our clients worldwide, and as part of and this facilitated conversational commerce, which is an important topic for this discussion. I'm based in the U.S. and certainly a lot of my focus is in the U.S. market. But certainly with the clients worldwide, the goal is to provide the service that can be leveraged all around.
Excellent, thank you. Down to Brazil and Rafa.
Hi guys, Rafael here. I'm a Brazilian lawyer based in São Paulo, and I work with several of the Brazilian and international companies investing in the region in Latin America, helping them navigate the whole regulatory and legal sides of all of the business that we are developing over here.
Excellent, thank you. Not far away to Tomas, please.
Hi, I'm having a little bit of audio trouble, but I'm based in Argentina. We are the premium DCB network in Latin America.
Excellent.
And we're working in the mobile DCB ecosystem.
Great, thank you. Over to Mark at DOCOMO.
Mark Sonntag, I'm the Chief Legal and Compliance Officer of DOCOMO Digital, and we're serving merchants globally to provide direct carrier billing services.
Excellent. We'll certainly begin to talk about carrier billing today. Finally, Ignacio from Digital.
Yeah. This is Ignacio Molto, Legal Director at Digital Virgo, a company leading the direct carrier billing services, focus obviously in Europe, but as well in Africa and in Latin.
Great. Okay. Well, we've got a pretty broad range of the planet here. Before we kick off, I think that obviously the best thing to do is to just whiz around everybody and talk about the main regulations that impact mobile payments stakeholders. But before we do that, just to kind of define our terms a little bit, this obviously is such a huge area. I should say that we had a prep call and we agreed that we wouldn't talk about physical payment, mobile payments, things like Apple Pay and some of the WeChat-based QR code type payments. We're not looking at that today. I think we've already talked earlier in the day about African mobile money, so we're not really talking about M-Pesa and that kind of thing. And we're going to stay away from Facebook, Libra, or DM, or whatever it's called this week, and all that kind of crypto stuff. So we're really sticking to in-app payments, mobile, website payments, in-messaging payments, and also direct carrier billing. So let's fly down to Rio first. And Rafa, if you could just summarize what have been the main regulations that have been enacted in your region.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So to keep it short, basically the goal of Brazilian regulatory bodies, especially the central bank, who's leading the pace on regulation in terms of payment systems and new payment platforms over here. One of the things is, and that has changed a lot because of the pandemic. We have like a population of 215 million right now. Although the pandemic is hitting us hard. And we have like 30 million bank accounts. So most of the huge majority of the population in Brazil doesn't have a bank account. And of course, we've been trying to put them and bring them to the game, put them online as soon as we can. We do have 180 million people that have a mobile phone. So because of that, of course, any means of digital payments, any in-app payments or any sort of payments that happen in the digital space are really welcome, because especially when we can kind of bypass the traditional banking system. Because of that, the central bank has been creating products like we've created Pix that is also able to be used for in-app payments. It's a kind of digital transfer method that it's online in real time. It's being used right now, and it's substituting the old traditional banking transfer methods, and it's being used right now in in-app payments as well. DCB is really strong, so of course the MNOs are really strong on this environment as well, especially for right now in the pandemic for entertainment and the content buying. Yesterday, the central bank announced that they are going to study new rules for digital currencies as well, but we are not talking about it, just for you to understand that they are looking into this area on a daily basis. In terms of regulation, the main concerns is the Brazilian banking system is highly regulated, and because of that, when the 2008 crisis hit, it arrived in Brazil for good in 2013 only. So because of all of the regulation, we survived like 3-4 more years without any issues in the banking system itself. So the main concern is, first of all, to preserve the stability of the banking system when the newcomers are entering, and how it can survive. The challenge is how we can survive the innovation and putting more oxygen on the system, more competitors, more people to work on this and create new products and platforms. And at the same time, how do we keep some level of security, both in a macro security state, so like how everyone knows that everyone that is transactioning on this system is a secure player, and then there's a lot of compliance on it for you to operate and become like a new player on the DCB and payment system in Brazil. It is a highly regulated thing. You have to present like all sorts of documents. I'm in the middle of one of those, and it's like more than 100 different types of documents that you have to show and prove. So it's like really hard compliance. The other thing is money laundering, and because Brazil is in Latin America, we cannot escape that. We have a lot of troubles with money laundering, and Brazil has like one of the tightest banking systems to avoid money laundering. We had cases like last week. We had a huge case where the federal police in Brazil got a huge case where they basically arrested people that were washing $15 million in crypto actives. But the beauty of the blockchain and crypto actives is everything's on the ledger, so you have ways to follow through and basically arrest people. I think the bad guys didn't understand that yet. So we know that it's happening right now. We know it's kind of uncontrolled. It's not so uncontrolled as people might think. But at the same time, we have this concern all the time. So at the same level, like, how do we stop and how do we control that there's no like huge operations, huge volumes of money going through the systems, be it in app payments, DCBs, or any other in the mobile spaces as well? How do we control that there's no money laundering on the middle of them? And how do we keep kind of some level of control, although keeping some level of innovation on it? So that's the challenge right now.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a great overview. Let's stay in LATAM and go over to Tomas and find out what's happening in Argentina.
Okay. So pretty much as Rafael mentioned, I would say that most Latin American countries, given that it's an industry which is a little behind in terms of maturity, we are still experiencing regulation gaps and spaces to be filled in many senses. I would say that the main factors that have been tackled either by government or the MNOs is to start registering the companies, the merchants, or the aggregators or integrators that are actually taking place in the ecosystem. But still, there's a lot of policy to be made in order to avoid many of the things that Rafael was just mentioning about money laundering and really having the possibility to identify the real user behind the mobile number. There is a specific and very, very big difference between Latin America. I would say we share more with emerging markets such as Africa, probably Southeast Asia, in comparison to the US or Europe, which were part of the markets that were being addressed before in the last conversation as well. Having a prepaid market being so big, one of the first regulations was to actually be able to set up an identity linked to a phone number in order to be able to actually top up money into the account. I think that's step one of all these measures. But there's still a very big way to go. One of the things that we do is we try to become partners and work as contributors in the ecosystem to work with the chambers in each territory. In Conatel in Paraguay, we Auspitel in Peru, Anatel in Brazil, and DOCOMO in Argentina. But there's still not like a policy like the US, the UE has done with the PSD2, like doing a regional or global policy that can bind us together and help us, mitigate any kind of trouble or address the situation as a whole. I think it is something that's a big opportunity, because today there's a lot of fright from many merchants, from MNOs and stuff. And if we were able to build a community that agglomerates several countries in the region with similar issues, similar problems, and similar cultural aspects, I think that would be an amazing move for us as an industry and would allow us to increase our reach and potentially unlock a few barriers to big merchants that are still not involving in this ecosystem because of these unregulated or less regulated transactions.
Is there any sign of that kind of cross-country?
I would say that most organizations are looking at things in the same way, and that to me is a very, very important thing. At least the focus is on the same thing. They're trying to focus on the identity of the user. They're trying to focus on understanding flows and how actually the payment system works, and defining maybe a universal approach to this. But still, I have not seen any interaction between different chambers of different countries.
Okay, well, it
could be something that we could do. We should probably work on this as a group to develop this, definitely.
Okay, well, there's a new MEF program being born as we speak. So
there we go.
I can say that will be lovely, because the main struggle that we are suffering, the companies, when we are basically trying to enable big merchants to go to regions more than into countries, is super complex, because then it's a different, even a regulatory ecosystem. And making a comparison between Brazil, Argentina, Peru. I mean, in LATAM, it's always that you need to go in a country-by-country basis in order to perform, let me say, the direct carrier billing services for the big merchants. This is my experience in this.
And if I may build on that, that's of course the beauty of the European system. So in the European Economic Area, you have a unified system, you have unified rules, you have a passporting system in place that allows you to work under one regulation, and everyone knows the rules and knows what to do. So for sure, something that we would like to see also for other regions.
So Mark, let's stick with you then. So why don't you just give us a quick overview of the regulation that does impact mobile payments players in the EU?
Happy to. Thomas already mentioned it. I think the main driver is for sure the Payment Service Directive 2 as a succeeding regulation to the Payment Service Directive 1. So there was already something in place that was replaced in 2019, and we're now basically in the second phase of implementation. So it has been transposed in local laws, and every step of it has been now is in execution of being implemented, like strong customer authentication that just now recently in 2021 in most of the European member states actually has been enforced. And then we are a quite mature market, so we are like already in the 6th iteration of the anti-money laundering directives. So there's some regulation already there, and then there's e-money regulation, an e-money directive in place that regulates electronic money services. So this is already everything quite mature.
What about for the direct carrier billing business? Obviously, there are exemptions there that make it possible to do those kinds of transactions. Could you just elaborate on that, Mark?
Yes, totally. I mean, there's an exemption in the Payment Service Directive 2 in Article 3, letter L, that allows service providers and carriers to provide direct carrier billing services without a license under certain requirements. There are certain conditions you need to meet. And however, there has been an exemption already under the first Payment Service Directive with requirements that were a little bit different, but in the end, we're leveraging on a system that has been in place for the last 10, 15 years. So this is something that is developing, and we are all, or the majority of players are working under those regulatory exemptions.
Okay, so Ignacio, let's move to you. So obviously you're also active in Europe. Do you, what's your verdict on the PSD2 and the e-money directive and various other regulations? Do you think they're doing a good job of stimulating competition and making it possible for new customers to access these services?
Yeah, I mean, if we narrow the conversation into the direct carrier billing regulation and just elaborating a little bit on what Mark was saying, what has happened in the regulation in the last 15 years in Europe with the direct carrier billing services, as Mark was saying, we were coming in the PSD1 with a very specific exemption, which was generally drafted, and then there were a lot of interpretation on what the telcos were able to perform under this exemption, because it was only stated that just for digital goods and the telecommunication, the telcos and the other stakeholders in the chain will be exempted for being granted with a license. That was the origin. And with the PSD2, what we saw is that the authority on one end narrowed the interpretation of that, just saying that only the telco was exempted on one end, which means then that the current stakeholders in that sort of transactions that are basically companies as us, the companies in the middle, the intermediaries that are bringing merchants, needs to be granted with a license. And therefore, with it, what you are gaining is some sort of certainty in the market to understand that only those companies that are making a payout to the merchant need to be authorized to make that sort of activities, and therefore you need to be compliant with all the European regulation, and not only because of the PSD2, but as well with anti-money laundering and imposing measures to avoid risks. And on the other hand, the exemption in the PSD2 was basically saying that it's narrow only to certain thresholds, 50 euros per transaction and 300 euros per month per mobile number. That was what they were saying. And fortunately, just saying that it's not only for digital goods, but as well for the concept of ticketing. Okay. And that's what we saw with the PSD2. Now, as Mark was saying as well, we are in the middle of this, let me say, implementation of that rule. That is, what is the meaning of ticketing? And then what we are seeing is that some authorities in Europe are very open to this concept, and some others are just basically narrowing to transport, to entry to venues, and very short in terms of interpretation on what is the meaning of that. And this is basically where we are, no? And what we think that may happen in the future is that, and I don't know if it's going to be with a PSD3, is that finally we will get a new regulation with some sort of harmonization between the member states on ruling what is going to happen with this specific exception for the direct carrier billing services.
I've written many words over the years about direct carrier billing for sort of physical or semi-physical products, and it's always a market that seems to be promising, but depending on what region you're in, it's possible somewhere and possible elsewhere. So, Ignacio, if I can just stick with you. So when you've seen that direct carrier billing approved for those kinds of products, has it proved popular with the public?
I mean, let me say, our experience is as follows. We started 15 years ago with basically the bus services, so all the SMS premium market and so on. We started, 5 years ago with just leveraging with Google Carrier Billing and with other big merchants and big markets starting to use this specific method of payment. My feeling is that whenever we embrace more telcos making more direct carrier billing services, they will be open to understand that they can go beyond the exemption. And then if they need to go beyond the exemption, is because they can either just acquiring the proper license, which takes time and takes a lot of not only economic effort, but as well being prepared for the compliance of the different regulation, or an agent of a payment institution. That is basically those companies that are acting as men in the middle, embracing and helping the telcos to start at least testing the water to understand if direct carrier billing can be a good solution, not only for digital goods, but for other goods and services. And this is what I think that is going to happen, hopefully in the near future.
Okay. So moving over to Bipin, there's a couple of comments there from Ignacio about carrier billing, about SMS billing as was, and obviously in the US there's been quite a lot of turmoil over there historically with SMS payments and billing for customization services, personalization services, and wallpapers and ringtones and all that sort of thing. And it all got wiped out really because of regulation. So, Bipin, can you sort of summarize what the situation is over there?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I was literally working for a carrier, when all this took place. So historically, our telcos are regulated, and predominantly most, overseas countries applies as well. And we were seeing so many consumer complaints related to carrier billings, and the telcos were slow to address these complaints. So the consumers were basically taking their concerns to the local politicians, whether they're state senators or federal representative. And eventually, these representatives were basically pushing on these telcos and says, okay, you got to do something. On top of that, these telcos wanted to expand into other markets beyond their traditional services. And given they were regulatory, the politician basically says, unless you address this, we are not going to let you expand into these other markets out there. So for the amount of money that these telcos were making, and to deal with all the headaches and challenges with the carrier billing, basically said it's not worth it. So pretty much all of that disappeared over 10 years ago. So today there is no carrier billing in the U.S. whatsoever. Certainly there were some bad actors in the industry that drove a lot of the customer-specific issues, but the telcos had decided, and that is no longer an option over here. Historically, now, today, the trend we are seeing is in form of a digital payment. So the point I think I want to say over here is that digital payment is growing worldwide out there, okay? The processors across the worldwide expect to see about an annual growth rate of about 17% over the next 7 to 8 years. And we think there will be about $113 billion annual digital processors, revenue standpoint. And all of that growth is being driven by, a few factors, including shift away from cash, e-commerce, and certainly the COVID was a large factor over there. The underutilization of credit in a lot of the international markets, and that being opening up. So that's also allowing more and more consumers to have access to credit, whereby they can then use the digital market to do the transactions. And last but not least is government support, as many of my colleagues over here stated, that for taxation reasons, governments have historically been supportive of digital payment because they can tackle the multiple issues in terms of the money laundering, the crimes, making sure the taxes are properly reported. So all of that has basically resulted in digital payment to be growing, but it's also has resulted in the commerce being growing, because now the consumer basically is saying is that, hey, I have the flexibility. I want to be able to use so-and-so payment types, whether it's a prepaid credit card, postpaid credit cards, or ACH, or mobile wallet, etc., and where I want to. Now, in terms of regulations or compliance, I would put it in a few buckets out there, starting with the payment providers policy. So think of like a Visa, just most recently in the US market, for example, it was pretty common to have a company such as magazines to say, hey, we give you 6 months of free subscription, and then we'll start automatic billing to you. And consumers were not basically, realizing that, sometimes when they signed up to say they're going to be paying for this service, they just thought, hey, this is free, and it were generating a lot of complaints. So basically, Visa said, no, you merchant cannot facilitate this type of service. Okay. The second category I would put in terms of compliance is the data privacy, and that's more arena like GDPR in the case of Europe. We have a CCPA for California. The third is the consumer security. Certainly, my colleagues over here talked quite a bit about the PSD2 in Europe and how that is, influencing and driving the needs for the data, the consumer security. The big one in the U.S. certainly is the payment card industry data security standards out there. If you are basically doing any kind of digital payment, and if you're processing that payment, you must have a compliancy to PCI in the U.S. to facilitate that service. And it's a large, expensive proposition to achieve that. So historically, vendors have worked with the PCI compliant vendor who already facilitate that service. But the key point being is that this is important compliance category, because if you don't meet the PCI compliant, and if you have a leakage in terms of the credit card data, you could have a hefty penalty to tackle that. And the last but not least is also the taxation related stuff. We had a case recently where taxation, local taxes, for example, historically based on whether you have a local, store that, and then in that case, like, yes, you are subject to making it, tax collection. But now you have with the e-commerce, the merchant could be, some 3,000 miles away and having a no local presence. Is that merchant responsible for, collecting that taxes over there? So, so now the merchant have to be, making sure that they are in tune with all the different regulatory around the taxation collection. Depends upon where the consumer is and making sure that they are collecting the taxes and and then providing that to the different governments appropriately.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a great overview. Obviously, Bipin and Sinch and other companies in that area are all looking at this new area of conversational commerce, which I'm sure we'll be covering on this MEF event and many other events in great detail. So there's a big question there is when payments are coming to that channel. So Rafa, if I can come back to you, WhatsApp is massively popular in Brazil, probably more than any other country in the world. If and when payments come to WhatsApp conversations with businesses, what kind of regulation might impact that or enable that?
They are here already. I'm using it. I'm trying to show you how that okay. would work, but I have to send money to someone.
Send
some to me.
You need a bank in Brazil. So, first of all, a little bit of context. WhatsApp has like 140 million users in Brazil out of the 180 million users. In the most recent surveys, they have like 98% of the people, of Brazilian users, they open WhatsApp at least 3 times a day. It's being used at least 1 hour a day for more than 90% of the people. It is the question right now in Brazil is, are we using WhatsApp or smartphones? Because WhatsApp became the internet for most mobile users in Brazil. That's it's like AOL in the past. Okay, so when they announced that they wanted to do payments inside of it, they were setting up the proper agreements with acquirers, Visa, Master, the banks, and everything else. And then the central bank was on the verge of launching the PIX, which I mentioned before, which is like this digital transfer payment that happens in real time. And they wanted to understand correctly what WhatsApp was. So they launched PIX, and 8 months later, WhatsApp has been launched. It was last week. The potential for WhatsApp to subvert the whole digital payment in Brazil is enormous, because you're just talking in the chat box and then you can send money for someone. There's limits right now. You can only send money in real time. There's no credit transactions. You cannot use your credit card or anything like that. You cannot send more than 1,000. So it's definitely for small and medium types of payments. But like I myself, I bought food on the beach, on the sand, on the seashore, using WhatsApp. I sent a message to the guy who was selling ice cream. So, and it's immediately, it's immediate. It happens really fast. You just need a phone number. That's it. Imagine what you can do for all sorts of things. Like they're using for e-commerce right now. Some like small merchants are using for selling small goods, and you don't have to like. You just need a bank account, like a simple bank account, and that's it mostly. So if you have any kind of bank account, that's it. Considering that in Brazil, you have like 30 million people who have bank accounts, that cannot be so massive as like other kinds of payments. Like DCB is still way bigger because you have way more people using mobile phones and having like a mobile account than anything else. But at the same time, the central bank and the banks, they're kind of simulating the creation and opening of bank accounts through solely digital procedures. So you don't need to see a manager or go to a bank or anything like that. You do everything online. With that in mind, we are trying to like kind of democratize the environment so people can like have bank accounts. When you have a bank account in Brazil, it's kind of you become a citizen. So during the pandemic, Brazil wanted to pay kind of a support payment for everything, a minimum payment for like the most poor people in the country, which is like 45 million people. So it's France. Like we have friends over here who don't have like a single plate of food every day. So because of the pandemic, they needed to stop working. They don't have formal jobs, so we needed to pay them. The way the government set this up was to pick up one of the public banks, which is kind of the most popular one, the one who already works paying on the support systems that we have in place. And they asked everyone to create a digital account so they could receive the money on these virtual bank accounts. They've opened up 35 million bank accounts in 2 months. It was really massive. These people, out of these 35 million people, they didn't have, they weren't citizens. They don't have IDs. They don't have fiscal numbers. They don't have bank accounts. They don't exist in the government system. Like we know they are alive, but we don't know anything about them. Now we do. So the way the government is seeing this right now is it is, by the end of the day, a way for us to actually put people into the system and support them to thrive during the pandemic and during what comes after.
Well, obviously, that's the kind of problem that mobile can solve and which regulation can enable. In Europe, of course, it's a very different situation where we don't have so many people who are unbanked. But Mark, if I can come back to you, we've just talked a little bit there about commerce inside rich messaging channels, WhatsApp and so on. What about the possibility of doing carrier billing inside those platforms? I had to write a paper about this a couple of years ago, and it was very difficult to get to the bottom of what exactly was possible and not possible. But it seems like, obviously, if you want to make an Apple Pay or an Android Pay payment inside a rich messaging channel, that's kind of easy to see how that can happen. But with direct carrier billing, it's a bit trickier. So what's the status of that and what regulation surrounds it?
Well, the interesting thing there is that in my perspective, the regulation is already there. So the limitations are given by the already existing regulations. So Payment Service Directive 2, the exemptions that we just talked about. If you're processing a payment with regards to the purchase of digital content, ticketing, voice-based services, and so on, you can do it within a chat with no problem. As soon as you want to do it for other verticals, as soon as you start selling physical goods, then of course it becomes a matter of being licensed or not. However, let's also just be clear, the regulation in Europe, the Payment Service Directive, does not say that direct carrier billing purchases are not possible for physical goods and other services. They only say that if you do it, you need to be licensed, and the mobile network operator needs to be as well. So as long as all the players within the value chain are licensed, they can use this channel to pay for or to process transactions for any kind of service, also within chat rooms and other kinds of any kind of channels.
And is DOCOMO when a company wants to do these kinds of transactions, how much of the regulatory burden does DOCOMO take on compared to your customers?
Well, I mean, we act as a payment service provider on behalf of our merchants. So the merchant selling to the end user, it does not fall under direct regulation. So the party that is regulated is ourselves. So it is DOCOMO Digital and the mobile network operator. And then it depends on what the mobile network operator wants to have. So we offer services where we take the regulatory burden on us, where we take mobile network operators as our agents. So it is something that we can cover, but not necessarily always need to. Right.
Okay, Thomas, if we can come back to you, what's your take on this area of putting payments inside messages? Is it something that you're seeing in Argentina, and are the regulators supporting it?
I've seen more movement in other territories. I would say that Latin America is still a bit behind in terms of RCS and how that kind of platforms and systems are going to be in play. They're taking, I think, Brazil might be and we always mention this when we speak about America, Brazil is like another continent. So even though we're very close, it's like another everything. I have not seen much movement in terms of that ecosystem. I am seeing movement in terms of starting to regulate RCS and that kind of channels because of the massive impact that they have, but more towards communication and how they interact and how they're regulated, but not yet integrated to payments. Most payments that we are being looked at or whatever are mainly wallets or new environments which are being developed by entrepreneurs or new companies in each territory. I wouldn't say that for the moment South America would have much to do with these kinds of moves or new ways to do billing for the moment.
Right. Okay. Obviously, Thomas, you mentioned earlier about the what you would like to see is some kind of international movement.
More work to the table, right?
So it's sort of we're down to our last couple of minutes now, but sticking to the kind of that idea of looking to the future. Bipin, if I can come back to you, is there? I don't know if this is a question you can answer, but how would you like to see? What kind of new regulation would you like to see, or new rules around new opportunities that might arise from mobile payments in the US?
I think that the lack of.
Sorry, I'm just asking Bipin that one. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
my bad.
So one of the key things around the getting someone onboarded for the digital payments is the whole topic around KYC, basically know your customers out there.
Yeah.
Certainly in the U.S. With the after 9/11, we had the Patriot Act, kicked in, and it's very difficult to open any kind of banking without you go through rigorous process out there. But that being said, if you go to other countries, developing countries, a lot of users don't have, as some of my colleagues alluded, country may have a 200 population, but basically only government thinks there is about 170, because the other 330 are forgotten or not visible. So having these individuals, having access in terms of the KYC, so it's that they can then also be facilitated, access to the credit, and then they can start leveraging that in terms of their daily life, so they don't have to spend for example, to make a payment that long line at the bank. They can basically be working in, and said their hours are more effectively utilized and improve their lives. In the U.S., certainly, there is a lot more entrepreneurship. So the evolving fintechs are basically driving a lot of the things around them, making payments via messaging. So now you have players basically saying, hey, you're providing customer service supports. Great. Now you can do a transaction all via messaging, send it some kind of a shortened link to the user to collect the payment, or for that matter, even simplify it, just having their card already on the back end office on the processor side. You could basically generate a one-time token against that account and request a user to say, just to respond ABC. If you're okay to make that payment, all the user has to do is ABC, and that payment is now, that is done, and the commerce is transacted. It's very simple, as that. So I think those are some of the things we are seeing, and certainly I think that will drive a lot of growth in the future out there.
Yeah, well, obviously anything that makes payments easier, as you alluded to there, also makes it easier for people to steal your money from you. So this is the balance that that regulation always has to accommodate. So just final words. Let's go to Ignacio. Same question for you. Is there any kind of regulation that you'd like to see introduced in Europe, or anything that you see on the horizon? And you've got 1 minute to answer the question.
So very quick, because for Europe, I think that it's something that I already said before. Is I really think that we still need some sort of harmonization between all the member states in terms of the implementation of the PSD2 and let me say
Okay, great. Well, and we've come to the end of our time. It's such a huge topic. We were always going to skim the surface of it, but I'm very grateful for all the expertise that we've had from the different corners of the world on this call. And we can conclude that regulation, probably like death and taxes, it's always going to be with us in some form. And the best regulation will, stimulate competition. So it can be a very good thing. So with that, I'll say thank you very much to Ignacio, to Rafael, Bipin, Thomas, and Mark. Thanks for your contributions. Thank you at home for watching, and enjoy the rest of this virtual event. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all. Pleasure.